I posted a video a while ago where I was shooting with the Sony a7 IV and I had my ISO set at 1000, and a couple of people pointed this out and asked if there wasn't going to be noise because the ISO level was so high. The rule of thumb with ISO is always the lower the better, but it's not always that simple. The simple definition for ISO is the sensitivity of your sensor to light. This simple definition of ISO comes from the days when we used to use film camera like this. And in this case, you can see there's actual film in the camera, and this film is coated with chemicals that are actually sensitive to light. And so that's where the definition comes from, and we've just continued to use it for digital cameras. So in this case, your film will be equivalent to your sensor, and the chemicals on the film will be equivalent to the photosites that you find in digital photography. And so those photosites do not change in terms of sensitivity, but what actually happens is light hits the sensor, hits those photosites, and those photosites create a voltage. This voltage or electrical charge is then sent to an amplifier on the sensor. It is at the amplifier stage of the process that your ISO kicks in. And so that amplification is done according to the ISO setting that you have on your camera. Any ISO change or amplification that takes place before the analog to digital conversion takes place is part of your camera's native ISO. Amplification that takes place after the digitization process is part of what is called your extended ISO. And this amplifier amplifies the signal so that it is usable by the next stage in the process. And that next stage is for that electrical signal, that analog signal, to be converted into a digital signal that can be understood by computer systems. Once it's in the digital realm, it is then processed according to the picture style that you have set on your camera, and it is saved as an image on your camera. Now, this whole circuitry in your camera and on your sensor creates noise, digital noise. Now, what we are doing when we are adjusting the ISO is we are adjusting the level of amplification of that analog signal that is created by your photosites. Now, when we increase the level of that signal, we are also increasing the level of the noise that is already present because of the circuitry. And so when you increase your ISO to very high levels, that's when you get that digital noise now being perceptible or being seen in your images, especially in the shadows. Each camera make and model has what is called its base ISO. Some people call this the native ISO. Native ISO is not really an accurate term for what we're talking about, but for the purposes of this video, and if you watch other videos, just know when they're talking about native ISO, they're probably talking more about the base ISO of the camera. Now, the base ISO is simply that ISO value where you get the cleanest image. For most cameras, this base ISO or native ISO is the lowest value that you can get on your camera. That kind of goes along the rule of thumb that we usually use, that the lowest ISO that you can get away with is the one that will get you the cleanest image. Now, that rule does not always apply. And so for the Sony that I was using, for example, when I'm shooting video, the best ISO for that camera is actually 800 for shooting S-Log video. Now, the best ISO can be different in the same camera for photography as it is for video. For example, with the Canon EOS R, the best ISO for photography is 100. So when I'm shooting C-Log video, you can see that the base ISO is 400. And then you have those two figures, 100 and 200 in brackets, and with an L that stands for low, and that means you're going into extended low range ISO. To complicate things even further, there are cameras that have dual base ISOs. You'll also hear those referred to as dual native ISOs. And those are two ISOs, one low one and one high one, where you get the cleanest image when you're shooting. For example, the Sony a7 IV has dual base ISOs at 800 for the lower one and 3200 at the higher level. What that means practically is that, let's say you're shooting on the Sony a7 IV and you are shooting at ISO 800 and your image still looks dark after you've made all your camera adjustments, you're actually better off shooting at ISO 3200, that's the higher base ISO, than shooting just below that higher base ISO. Ideally, the way this base ISO works is that your image at 800 should be just as clean as the image that you get at 3200. So if you're shooting with a camera that has a dual base ISO and you're shooting in low light conditions, it's actually better for you to push your ISO up to the second higher base ISO than shooting just under that second base ISO.